I mean, this has been a very, very hard time for all of us. And I think that now being able to have that trusted leadership and having that relationship is critical in what we do as leaders.
Hey, everybody, and thanks for tuning in to this edition of Future Ready's Leading Through Unprecedented Times. So excited to have a great friend here today, an amazing leader from Connecticut, and that's Superintendent Dr. Michael Connor. Michael, it's so awesome to have you here today. Can you take a moment just to introduce yourself and share with our audience just who you are and where you're from?
Yeah. Hey, Tom, how you doing? Great to be here. Great to be with you. Obviously, your work has had great impact in the education landscape. So continue the great work that you're doing. So yeah, we're located Middletown Public Schools. I am the superintendent located in Middletown, Connecticut, right in the heart of Connecticut, Central Connecticut here. We're the home of Wesleyan University. We're roughly about, 30 minutes away from Yale University, about 45 minutes away from UConn, and really a progressive district, employing progressive it's not just on the Board of Education side, but also on the municipal side as well with our newly elected mayor. So really having a great time, really trying to move the district forward, move our organization forward. We've been doing great from a summative standpoint, but more importantly, I think that we've done really good during this COVID-19 pandemic and the health crisis, how we're able to adjust and have this really radical shift in education and how we adjusted to it. So yeah, Tom, a lot of great success from that dynamic as well. So yeah, enjoying where I'm at.
Awesome. So let's actually dive into that a little bit. Overnight, our teachers were asked to completely redo what they do. Our principals, everybody was asked to just redesign what they've done. So take a few minutes, if you would, and reflect on the end of last school year, just some lessons learned, maybe things that came to the forefront and where your thinking was just in all that.
Looking at the, yeah, it's a great question. The dynamic of where we were back in March. Having to radically shift to a remote learning environment, defining what open access education looks like from the context of incorporating asynchronous and synchronous practices. Reflections, I think, on it is that because we were already moving towards that level of progression via our strategic operating plan, Middletown 2021, where we had elements of blended learning, elements of personalized learning. I think that this actually accelerated our implementation of moving towards that specific paradigm of education. I also think that now, as we're going into the fall, that we're able to create a true blended, personalized hybrid model because of the alternative scheduling and the social distancing guidelines and parameters that we have to adhere to ensure all of our students and staff are safe. So now that having that professional learning, that building capacity around being in a hybrid model, being able to move from asynchronous practices to synchronous practices, face-to-face instruction to online instruction, and having that level of being multifaceted with practitioners and leaders is something that one of the lessons learned that we're going to have to continue to strengthen and disrupt that model, because ultimately that model is going to move into a new model. We don't know what that is, obviously. But again, I just think that the shift of learning that we went through nationally as educators has brought the demand of education, not just simple supply development of schools and curriculum.
Yeah, really well said. So let's dive into that a little bit as we look forward and be forward thinking there. I know at this recording, states are all over the map in terms of the guidance that they've given districts on what social distancing in schools would have to look like, or requirements. And so there's a lot of unknowns there at this point. But when we take a look at that, what are some things as the superintendent that are on your radar for the opening of next school year, whether it's, scheduling or those kinds of things that you're trying to work through? Obviously when this airs, you'll have a bit more of in terms of clarity and answers. But what are some of the things that are on your plate at this point that you're trying to work through?
I think one is defining what our model is going to look like, aligning our academic model our hybrid blended personalized learning model to align to the operational drivers that are going to have to be a key component in what this academic design or this multimodal model looks like. For an example would be if we're limited to 10 kids in a classroom, right? And we know that in a traditional model, there's 20, 25 kids based off of contractual guidelines in a classroom. Those kids are going to have to be on an alternative day. Looking at how we create professional development and professional learning for our practitioners around the elements of, let's say, an enriched virtual model, blended model that Michael Horn talks about, or whole group rotation or station rotation, or building individual pathways to curtail some of the immense achievement gaps that were created by COVID, and to address some of the learning gains that have been lost over the academic year. So when you think about it, you know, you're looking at how to address multiple symptoms around this whole root cause of safety, achievement gaps, learning loss gains that we're going to have to deal with, and professional capital and capacity with our teachers and leaders, and how to be instructional leaders and how to be practitioners in these hybrid models. So, you know, there's this conglomerate of what we have to deal with. But I think as one of the lessons learned, what we're going to be focusing on is building collective and individual capacity within these new academic paradigms.
Yeah, so well said. So let's unpack a couple of the things that you just talked about, learning loss and professional learning. And we could take any one of these topics and really dive into it for hours at a time, like you're doing with your leadership teams. Let's start with the learning loss piece, something that you mentioned, something that's been in the news, something that parents have raised awareness of. You know, you've got your special ed areas as well, and some statistics out there about meeting the needs of those students and furthering the gap and some of the things that have happened. So, you know, in Middletown, what are you all doing to make sure that we do everything that we can to close those gaps the best that we can, knowing that time has been limited, teachers have been working at wit's end, doing everything they can? How has that been on your radar to make sure that kids have what they need moving forward?
Yeah, you know, that's one of the key symptoms that is driving some of the instructional changes that we're doing. You know, as an example would be, you know, that we're going to have, based off of the forecasting analysis, whether it be from NWEA, college and career readiness, that, you know, that these gaps are going to be hard to mitigate. So, and you're going to have students that are going to miss up to 12 weeks of instruction. You know, based off of that, we're going to see students for 2.5 years. Some studies have seen that students are only going to retain 50% of what they learned from the 1920 academic year. That's where teachers are going to have to become highly effective in differentiated practices, highly effective in individualized instruction with students, based off of really looking at standards that are recalibrated because of these gaps. So again, you know, when I take a look at that, you know, it goes back to blended learning. You know, you were going to have 10, 15 different mini lessons going on at the same time in one of the blended learning models, because again, we're going to have such this wide gap. You know, we're going to have to look at how we create interdisciplinary team structures at the secondary level, where now everybody's a reading teacher, everybody's a math teacher. And we have to look at how we approach students differently, especially from an SEL standpoint, because social emotional learning is going to have to be underpinned in everything that we do. And our kids are going to come back with immense trauma, our adults are going to come back with immense trauma as well. So yeah, you know, the academic gap, the academic achievement gap, the potential or forecasted or predicted gaps that we're going to see, we're going to have to look at how we teach kids differently. The one size fit all model is going to have to be eradicated. The factory approach of didactyl and mechanistic teaching approaches are going to have to be different. So we're going to have to create a new repertoire with our practitioners.
Yeah, so well said, and I couldn't agree more. So in supporting that second piece here and supporting those teachers, you know, what has professional learning looked like over the past couple of months? Everything that you were just talking about, blended models, there's such shifts in thinking, the way shifts in just protocol and pedagogy, the way we go about doing things. So what has professional learning looked like in the last couple of months, and where do you see it going as a district in the future to support teachers?
Yeah, Tom, this is, I think you will like this because this is where we applied our design thinking principles. And we took some prototypes, and it was just basic, following that traditional model that Brown talks about, that Colloquial talks about, that Locke talks about in the work, is that we took some ideas, we made them into solutions because, again, how do we look at professional learning in a different manner that is aligned to pedagogy? And we created situations where we partner up with one of my Innovation for Equity brothers, as we call Jason Green, who has this a company called LinkSpring, and we actually partner with him where now teachers were receiving individualized and personalized coaching based off of their own individual needs. And then coupled with that, we had a convocation style every Thursday at 1 o'clock, where our teachers, all 600 of our teachers, all of our leaders would come right here, how we are virtually, and work with Eric Schiniger and Weston Kersnick on best practices, high leverage strategies that Hattie outlined, so we can create that common language of instruction in this virtual learning environment. One thing that I noticed based off of this, if we're talking about a complete iterative cycle within design thinking and how we can make it into a systems design, is that we're going to go to a hybrid model with professional learning where teachers are able to have coaching, collaboration. The distribution and the duration is going to be differentiated based off of what they need. It'll be structured. It'll have structures in that context. And then also a hybrid model where, let's say that our teachers are going to work with a Weston or Eric or a Polly from the International Center for 1 hour, and then go back in groups and focus on instructional design with those high leverage strategies. So what we saw is kind of what we experienced within our students, that traditional models of professional development can be completely exploited and disrupted for better ways of delivery and sustainability within the system.
Yeah, so well said. And I think as school and district leaders, like if we don't change the practices of supporting teachers, how can we expect them to change the practices in the classroom?
Absolutely.
We can't have that old model of professional learning of sit and get one size fits all, telling them to do something completely differently. So kudos to you and your team for modeling that and for leading the way. One of the things, Michael, I know you're passionate about is around equity and all meaning all. And so talk to us about how is it that, you as a superintendent, your leadership team, make sure that those students that are most at risk or traditionally marginalized groups in the past, whether we're talking about race or socioeconomics or special education or so many facets to that, how do you all make sure that they are front and center on all decision making?
Absolutely. Equity is a part of our organizational strategy, innovation and equity simultaneously, but more on the lines, making sure that kids receive everything that they need, right? Having access, right? When we talk about access and opportunity, right? As an example would be during this COVID-19 pandemic, we made sure that every single student had internet access points and was able to have Chromebooks so they're able to access their teaching. So we don't have inequities within our public school system. Every decision that we make is done with an equity lens, right? We here in Middletown, we don't tap out, right? We always want to tap into the problem or lean into the problem to ensure that, hey, is privilege underscored in this decision, right? Is low expectations a part of this where we can be able to eliminate that at the outset? So these are conversations that make a lot of people uncomfortable. And when people get uncomfortable, they don't truly want to address the explicit factors that create inequities. And dismantling some of the structures, current structures and systems and paradigms that we're used to in education have to fundamentally be disrupted, right? And those are the things that we do when we look at equity, and ensuring that, students during the COVID-19 pandemic, they had ability to have breakfast and lunch. We weren't just feeding students, we were feeding families as well, basic needs. And those are the things that, we're going to continuously to look at today. I met with my leadership team, been working hand in hand with the mayor about looking at specific policies, how we can ensure that racial equity is always grounded in Middletown as a city, and also Middletown Public Schools, so that we can eradicate and eliminate racism. Obviously, those are very ambitious, bold goals, but we want to ensure that we ground policies so that now our practices, there's a level of accountability with our practices. So equity is a part of everything that we do, every single instructional and operational thread here in every decision that we make for our kids and our families.
Yeah, beautifully and wonderfully said, truly. And one of the things I respected the most about, it's really looking at having those hard conversations that sometimes make people feel uncomfortable. And so, at Future Ready Schools, the equity and access, the equity and opportunity, and then looking at things like race and making sure that we have equitable outcomes for our kids, and making sure, like you said, we're taking those structures, which haven't always been equitable by any means, and saying, let's take a look at those structures and break those down to make sure that every child has those opportunities. And kudos for your leadership for leading the way with that and recognizing that. One of the pieces that I also recognize about you and just who you are and how you lead is how much you value the human component and just the relational side. And so how do you also keep the relationships, and with all the stuff that's going on and all the things around learning loss or data and or the financial, the budgets, how do we make sure in all the decisions that we make as school and district leaders that the humanistic side, the relational side, is also front and center and really core to the work?
Yeah, no, great question, because I always say we're in the people business, we're in the kid business. This is servant leadership, right? And in order for us to drive our organizational strategies, we can have all of the hardware, right? And what I mean by hardware is all the structures and the systems and the strategic approaches that are underscored by analytics. We can throw all of that jargon, into our practices. We can be able to recite a myriad of empirical research or efficacy studies. But if people don't buy in and believe in that, if people don't trust you, if people don't have a relationship with you, all of that becomes just empty words, empty jargon. And I'm huge on relationships, and I think that in order for people to take risk in decision making within an organization, of their practices, for them to have what I like to call this level of positive vulnerability, where they're vulnerable to learn and they're vulnerable to be able to move the organization, for your families, for your community. Those are the critical aspects of everything. It's the software. And that's what a lot of people don't talk about, and need to talk about it more, especially in these vulnerable times that we have been experiencing, over the past few weeks, over the past few months, what we've been seeing nationally. We need to be able to trust somebody. We need to be able to have trusted leadership out there. And that's what I want to do, and that's what I always ground my practices on, is that relationships is foundational to any success of any organization, of any industry, of any student or family, is that they got to be able to trust you. And when I mean, this has been a very, very hard time for all of us, and I think that now being able to have that trusted leadership and having that relationship is critical in what we do as leaders. So yeah, throw out all the education jargon is how people are able to look at you during a time of need and a time of struggle.
Yeah, just hitting on trust and risk taking and just loving and caring about people is the nature of true leadership. And just so well said there, my friend. So one final question for you. We've got so much out there with fear, and it's just real and it's rampant. And there's, we're in the midst of a lot of unrest in our country and so many facets to just uncertainties that are out there. So with all that we have that's going on, and as we look forward to next school year, what's one piece of advice you have for other superintendents, principals, and other educators before they embark on next year's journey? What would you say?
I would say the first thing that they need to do is, again, it's kind of what we just talked about a few seconds ago. We have to, as educators, reestablish trust because of the last few months that we've encountered. We haven't seen our kids since March, and that's 5-6 months that we haven't seen our kids, and our families are going to have to regain trust in sending the kids back into the buildings. They're going to have to regain a lot of trust because there's going to be immense gaps. And I'm not just talking about achievement gaps or learning gaps, but there's going to be immense gaps in the context of dealing with trauma and mental health from not just from a whole child standpoint, but a whole family, whole community dynamic. So I would say that we got to lean into our families and be able to say, hey, we're here with you. We understand that, there was some critical times where we haven't seen you, but we're going to trust us to be able to regain and to have this level of developing deeper relationships with families and students, because this is going to be, again, like I said, we can talk about models all day, but our kids are going to need us. We're 6, 7, 8-year-old students that their only outlet is their teacher, and they haven't seen their teacher in so long, or haven't seen their school in so long. Reach out to them and be that one person, or be that leader, or be that teacher that our kids can just completely rely on. So that's the first thing I say, is reestablishing relationships, and everything will fall into place.
I certainly can't say it any better than that. So well said, my friend. Everybody, that's Dr. Michael Connor. Michael, thank you so much for your time today, and keep leading the way.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tom. Appreciate you.